Great.
All right, thanks everyone for joining in. We have with us today also Ludewig-Verdehr and Walter Verdehr, the founding members of the Verdehr Trio. And for those of you who haven't heard their music already, violin, clarinet, piano, a trio that was nearly non-existent before they started doing the commissioning that they have. And they've really created an entire medium through all of the work that they did through their careers. And so today we're going to be asking them some questions that have a lot to do with all of that experience they had. So, well, Elsa and Walter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Glad to be here.
So I thought one of the first things I would ask about, since this is what certainly comes into my mind when I'm thinking about your commissioning, what some of your experiences were when you were first starting to commission composers.
Yeah, well, basically, as you know, there were only about 5 or 6 works for this combination, and we started out playing those. We'd alternate between those and sonatas on our programs. But after about 3 or 4 years, we thought, well, we really can't keep playing these pieces the rest of our lives. And that's when we started to commission. I happen to know Carol Husa from a previous concert or two, and Leslie Bassett was at the University of Michigan and a prominent composer. So those were our first 2 commissions. I applied for grants for both and got them. And then we continued on with Ned Rorem and Thea Musgrave. And at first, as it turned out, I, of course, was the one that was interested more in new music. But Walter, being an 18th and 19th century man before, suddenly became the one who did, from then on, really most of the commissioning. He has a wonderful way on the phone and was able to convince a number of composers to write for us. We ended up with about 11 Pulitzer Prize winners and people from all sorts of different countries. At one time, I knew how many countries, but I've kind of forgotten. But this is what we did. And basically, it involved a lot of work because we did a lot of writing to get concerts, and concerts beget concerts. Then you meet composers, and one commission led to another. So I think I'll leave it up to Walter now because he really carried on from there.
Well, when we started to commission, it was actually the late 70s, and it was Elsa's idea to expand our repertoire because in the early 70s anyway, as we've mentioned, everybody knows the Bartók and the Milhaud, maybe the Stravinsky, maybe the Khachaturian and the Berg. Anyway, we about mid-70s, Elsa felt that we should get some more pieces. So we started out asking our composer colleagues at MSU, Jerry Hutchison and James Niblock. And then, as Elsa mentioned, she thought that worked just very well, so that we had some original works. And we got Carl Husa and the Leslie Bassett, who were very prominent. And then Don Freund, we asked him, and he wrote us a wonderful piece.
Now at University of Indiana.
Yes, he's head of composition.
And interestingly enough, avant-garde in its day, but still somewhat avant-garde. A wonderful piece. We love playing it.
Yes, and so 3 very diverse styles of composition. So we started with that, and we thought that's what we need, is really to have a large repertoire, like the string quartet, of course, or the piano trio, violin, cello, and piano. Anyway, so then we launched a drive to get new works. Now, that's become very popular. Nowadays, everybody does it. But with us, it came kind of a while after we started trying to establish a
Out
trio.
of real necessity.
Out of necessity,
Yeah.
yes. But before I start mentioning some of the pieces, I would say, of course, today things are much different and people worry about money, as you always have to worry about money. But if you are interested in commissioning new music, you should start by looking around your composer friends first and getting to know their styles and the teachers also. And then seeing if you could get some people to write for you, so you get a sense of what it feels like. to play new music. It's really quite exciting.
I have to say that Walter often just called up composers and asked them to write. For instance, once we had been listening on the radio, we heard Peter Schickerle, who had been a friend of Walter's at Juilliard, and then similarly Stanislav Skrobachevsky, the conductor of the Minneapolis Orchestra. So Walter just picked up the phone actually and asked them, and to his surprise or pleasure, they both agreed. And so you did that a number of times.
Yes, well, you have to contact them. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to reach anyone by phone, but you can still try by text or email or leaving a phone message. But in any case, so that's how we started. And then, of course, in establishing a repertoire, I always thought it's very important to get many different styles of composition, not just one style. You know, different styles are au courant or politically correct or whatever at the time we're living. But I thought it's important also to get composers maybe who were considered old-fashioned, like Giancarlo Menotti, for example, at the time, you know, in the early 90s when I invited him to write for us. And maybe, you know, his music was considered certainly not avant-garde or au courant, but I thought he's a wonderful composer. He's written beautiful music. So anyway, we were very fortunate. He agreed to write for us. Same with Alan Hovhaness, who wrote in his very own kind of romantic, exotic way, and he wrote a wonderful piece for us,
as well as Aratunian.
And then I thought, of course, we need some avant-garde music as well. So I wrote to Pierre Boulez, and his secretary answered, Mr. Boulez is too busy, but he would recommend some of his collaborators at the Centre IRCAM. So he recommended, among others, Philippe Manoury and several others, anyway, whose name you would know, but I've forgotten. Anyway, so we tried for that. And then Peter Sculthorpe was one of our favorites, and he wrote very much in his own style. He was Australia's leading and most famous composers. He was sort of their Aaron Copland.
And you wondered about early experiences. Peter liked to write for people that he knew and didn't want to just write for anybody. So we were invited to lunch at his house, and he picked us up in his little MG. Walter and he sat in the seats in the front, and the rest of the car was nothing. I sat on the floor in the back. And we went to the house, had a lovely lunch, got to know him well. He became actually my favorite composer. I just loved that man. And he wrote us just two incredibly beautiful, wonderful pieces. And I really do recommend that you look at that at some point. And speaking of other people who became really good friends and are wonderful people, Joan Towers' piece, which is, you know, I guess you certainly can't call it avant-garde, but it's certainly modern, I guess you can use the word. And very effective. And we really particularly enjoy playing that. Then there's a new piece, well, relatively new in the last 10 years, by Kevin Putz, wrote 3 beautiful nocturnes for us. And Putz, of course, is quite well known these days. In addition, Bright Cheng wrote Tibetan Dance, which has a very driving, wonderful dance at the end and a beautiful, beautiful slow movement.
And Jennifer Higdon also wrote us a short piece. It's called Dash, but it's very effective and it's a great concert opener.
Yeah, it's 4.5 minutes long. I'll never forget, we played that once down in Detroit at a music club. And after we finished, one person just whooped because it's such a startling end. You really want to play that if you have a trio of our combination. Wonderful opener, and it gets things off to a good start. But then there are a lot of others. William Balcom, of course, one of the best known composers of the day, wrote a terrific and, I must say, difficult trio for us. The first page is enough to make you think twice playing the clarinet. But one of my very favorite pieces, and I think I speak for Walter, Sebastian Courier, who's quite well known these days, wrote a piece called Verge, where everything is almost too fast, almost too slow, almost too this, almost too that. Very clever concept, which really works well and provides for a lot of different sonorities. And then one of my favorites that people wouldn't know because he's not as well known as composer, his name is Gerald Cohen, and he wrote something called Variously Blue. That's basically a set of variations and just incredibly clever.
Very brilliant piece.
Yeah, and a Los Angeles composer that people might not know wrote us two pieces. One is Reflections, which gets a little Bergian at the beginning and then sort of rolls into some jazz and then goes back to Berg. It's a wonderful piece. And then his sketchbook, which are three lighter pieces that a number of, well, some of my former students have played and enjoyed.
And his name is Gernot Wolfgang.
Yeah.
And another person I'd like to mention, who's also very prominent, a wonderful composer, Roberto Sierra, wrote us a terrific piece.
And well, we could go on with names,
Yes.
but I suggest you check out our website. And if you ever have a question about our repertoire, we're glad to answer. Just to write to Verdehr at msu.edu or Verdehr E, which is me, at msu.edu. And we're always glad to answer any questions about the repertoire. So, Greg, what else did you have in mind you'd like
Well,
to?
yeah, you know, with all of these composers you worked with, one of the things that I'm always curious about when you approach a composer, do you ever have, other than the request to write for your particular instrumentation, do you have specific requests of the composer going in?
Well, in some cases, yes, after we had been commissioning for a while, we asked for certain things, like not too much doubling and not having the clarinet playing a high register while the violin is playing at the same time, because it's almost impossible to come through in that
Or
case.
to balance. Yeah, and that was something we learned early on. One of the first pieces commissioned for us had a lot of parallel writing, clarinet always on the bottom, but in the upper half of the clarinet register, and Walter, the violin on top, and didn't work out too well. It was really
Well, it's very hard,
to
because
match.
the clarinet's so much more powerful, especially in the high register. But anyway, and the other thing we asked them to do is give the clarinet a chance to breathe, because some composers had the clarinet playing all the time, often along with the violin. So
Can't have that.
so yeah, it's a very important thing not to have too much of that. But for most people, of course, probably don't know many of our works, and we wanted people to have a chance to at least get to know some of them. So we've recorded many, and those are available on Crystal Records. We have 24 CDs with Crystal, and but you have to either buy the CDs, but you can get it on Apple Music or any of those things that you have to be a member of iTunes, I guess. And you can download any of them. But also on YouTube, we've put 28 videos with some of the most important composers, Bright Cheng, Aratunian, Hovhannes, Minati, Joan Tower,
Well, which is really wonderful too. You really get an idea of their personality, and they give you an insight into a piece that you might not have had, or that we might not even have had until we discussed the pieces with
Yes,
them.
but best of all, you can listen to the pieces and you can watch us playing them. So that's a great help.
I thought best of all with the interviews.
Well, no, I mean, as far as getting a
Yeah.
sense of what the music is like, because it's very difficult, for most people to pick up a score and figure out what that sounds like, or hear all these pieces that we've commissioned, but there's no way unless you hear them actually to decide if you like them or not. So that was the reason for that.
And the perspective back and forth with the composers talking about the music and then hearing the examples, I find to be particularly compelling, and it really gives a good sense about the process as it then turned into the music. I find that to be really interesting. I think a lot of people would enjoy that particular part too.
Exactly. And also the fact that you can actually see who wrote it and sound like in person is interesting.
I was just curious if there are, after all these different composers you work with, there must be so many different stories, but are there any particularly memorable moments from the time that you've worked with composers, other than like sitting in the back of the MG?
Let me just say one, because the program notes are on our website, but Menotti, when he came and we did the premiere, this is when he had written, two movements, and he was going to bring the third movement with him to MSU, and we were going to play it for a birthday celebration in his honor. It turns out he had forgotten his glasses, so he couldn't write the last movement on the plane, although he said it's all up there. So he got there and started to write it, but then he was involved in going to this class and that class. And finally, on Saturday morning at noon, he finished the last chord. And then we learned the last movement that afternoon and played it that night. And I have to say that was stressful. Although, as he said, oh, my music is not so hard. But that was one of the most memorable ones.
Yes, and then David Diamond was very nice.
Lovely man.
We discussed the piece at some length, and then of course he has his own style of writing, and the Library of Congress commissioned that. And so when we played it, he came to the dress rehearsal in Kennedy Center where we were playing, and it was the first time he'd actually heard the piece. And it's a great big piece. It's about 25 minutes or so, and he heard us play it through, and he said at the end, "That's the first time I've heard. I had no idea these three instruments could sound so beautiful together." So that really warmed our hearts.
We really liked him after that. But no, actually, one of my favorite times when we went to South Carolina, and somehow it had happened that both Libby Larson and Joan Tower were also on that trip. And then we had played in Washington, and Peter Sculto happened to be in the country, and so we invited him, and he came along with us. So we had what they called the Joan and Libby show, and they would talk to the composers, and then we played their pieces at concerts that night. And it was that time that was the George Bush Al Gore election, and it still hadn't been decided. And Peter just loved to go down to the bar in the southern area and listen to the people talking about in their quaint accents, he thought, but he's got a quaint accent himself, but talking about the election and what was happening. So that was just one of the most wonderful times. Those three wonderful composers, to be together with them for a few days was something we'll never forget. Any other things?
Well,
that's amazing.
One of your questions that you asked us before about talking to composers about what we wanted them to do. I thought in the late 80s that it might be nice for us to have a triple concerto, since triple concertos exist for, violin, cello, and piano. And so we started asking some people, notable among them. Well, the first one was Thomas Christian David. He was the head of composition in Vienna. And then Skrovačevský, the conductor in Minnesota, a wonderful composer. And then a man named William Wallace also. Anyway, so we got about 6 double concertos there. We put them out on 2 CDs. And then I asked about, those were triple concertos. Then I asked about double concertos. I mean, it's very interesting if you have a chance to work with orchestra, often in universities, and if groups want to play. So we have
wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. We just have a couple of questions that came in from people. I wanted to relay these on. We have a question here. If there was any composer you worked with where the experience was most collaborative, where you had back and forth input from the trio and changes, that kind of thing.
Well, first I'd like to say with most of them, we really didn't, but who did we?
Well, Libby Larson.
Okay.
Libby Larson.
Yeah.
And then with Joan Tower also, because Libby Larson,
Mostly they cut the pieces.
yes, she, both of them decided to, cut some passages out to tighten up the form, and
It really made a difference.
it made a big difference, and they're as a result they're very effective, wonderful pieces.
And if there's one thing I can say too, with so many of the compositions, I think it's always good not to be too long. And there were some that perhaps were too long, and they very cleverly figured that out and made just wonderful pieces out of them. So
another person was Thea Musgrave. She wrote us a piece
lovely.
that gave, it's beautiful pieces called the Pierrot, and she gave us directions, we should stand up and go to the other side of the stage and so forth. And we weren't crazy about doing that. And I had known a ballet dancer who had her own dance company by that time. And so I asked Thea if she would object if we had it choreographed or if she'd be interested. And she said, yes, by all means. And the same actually for Augusta Reed Thomas, who's also a wonderful contemporary composer. And we had this person, Jennifer Muller. Unfortunately, she passed away last year, but she had her own dance company, Jennifer Muller, The Works. And we have the Musgrave is on video, actually on YouTube. Yes. So if you look Thea Musgrave, I think it's a wonderful thing because they have both the players, us playing, and then they have three characters, of the Commedia dell'arte, Pierrot, Columbine, and Harlequin, dancing and moving around us. It's very effective in 5 scenes. Anyway, so those are some of our collaborations.
Lovely. Another question about commissioning we have here, asking if your students have continued your legacy of commissioning, and if there's a list of people who've also continued to commission for the trio instrumentation.
Well, actually, yes, quite a few have. Ones that come to mind in particularly, well, in Montana, Maxine Ramey had a trio for many years. Right now, her violinist has a broken arm, or she would still have a trio going, and it will function again when it comes back. I think John Hilden in Florida State has commissioned a number of pieces, and there are several that I can't think of right now, but the most important one, you take it from here,
is called the Plexus Trio. Plexus. They're in Melbourne, Australia, and one of my former students is associate principal, second in the Melbourne Symphony, and the principal clarinet of Melbourne is also in that, and her husband is a wonderful pianist, a Greek pianist. So, and they've commissioned mostly Australian composers, and they've done a number of our commissions as well. But I think they're up to at least 60, maybe close to 100 commissions. So they've provided a very substantial amount of new literature.
And then actually we should probably mention, we decided to give scholarships at various schools, at the Eastman School here, North Texas, and at Indiana. And the scholarship, oh dear, that's going to ring 4 times. The scholarship provides a scholarship for 3 people to put on a program of our works. And that's been very successful. And there's one group that's continuing with that. So, and then we do hear from a number of groups from all over, particularly in Europe. So yes, this has grown.
And through the internet, a lot of the repertoire, the music is available in all over the world through YouTube, especially. And as I say, we have those 28 videos, and then we put out during COVID what's called an archival series of 9 CDs.
What archival means is most of them were live or recordings that, but we didn't do them actually, and we just took them live.
They were not studio recordings, but
Yeah.
they were taken from live concert, and they include works by prominent people, David Ott and Alvin Singleton, and also the Brazilian composer.
And some not so known, but my
Yes.
favorite was Elena Firsova, who was a Russian married to Dmitry Smirnov, who also wrote us a piece. And that was the thing too, whenever we went in different countries, we would commission pieces from the various composers we met. So really, it's sort of like one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And the main thing is to, and you know, one thing I would say, if you're going to want to commission, get associated with a university or a college. I must say Michigan State was just terrific as far as helping us, sponsored a number of our commissions. And that's always a good place. They helped also in producing some of our DVDs and CDs. You
Yes,
can't say
right.
enough good for Michigan State.
Right.
That's so wonderful. Thanks to both of you. I see here that we're about to start up our next session, but Elsa and Walter, thank you so much for showing everybody who may not have always known about your work already, some of these things that you've already done and the stories, and especially having all the links in the comments that people can follow up and see all the nearly 200 works that you've added to the repertoire. Really pretty impressive, and we're very, very appreciative of all that work.
I'll leave you with the note that if people are interested in trying to get the music, the libraries at Juilliard, Eastman, MSU, Indiana, and North Texas,
And Oberlin.
have most of our music.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That's amazing.
So, okay.
Thank you, Greg. Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to see you, Jeff.
Yes.
So thank you both so much. And thank you to Greg for leading this session. Our concert with E-flat clarinet works has just started over on YouTube. I dropped that link in the chat. So please follow that link and we'll see you over there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.